Good afternoon. My name is Chris Butler. I'm the Chief of Investigations for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. This morning at around 10 a.m., police officers were dispatched to the 11,400 block of Avery Drive in reference to a family disturbance. Family members had telephoned 911 and told us that an adult individual that resides in the home, a white male who's in his 40s, was having a mental episode of some sort. It was described by family members that this person was breaking things, had damaged a car and other property on the premise itself. Police officers were dispatched. As that information came in, the officers that responded to the call, the individual himself telephones the police and tells 911 operators something to the effect that he is ready for the police, he no longer wants to live. So all this information is being upgraded in the call as the police officers are responding to the scene. When officers get close to the scene, they meet briefly, which is customary whenever they go to calls that are a significant threat level to the officer. The officers arrive in front of the residence. The first officer that arrives gets out of his car. He immediately sees the individual that is described seated on the front porch. As the officer gets out of his car, the individual that's on the front porch stands up, is holding a large kitchen knife in his hand, and starts walking towards the officer. The officer tells the individual repeatedly to drop the knife, to stop advancing on him. And the way it's being described initially, you got to understand some of this stuff is just preliminary. The individual has what I would describe as a 1,000-yard stare at the officer, just looking straight at him, not obeying any type of commands to drop the knife or anything. In fact, tells the officer that he wants to die. The officer, as the individual continues to advance on him, the officer discharges his firearm several times at the individual. The individual collapses. The officers immediately move in, disarm the individual, and render first aid until Jacksonville Fire Rescue Department arrive on scene. The individual was transported to a hospital, and he has since died from his injuries. I'll take any questions that you have, and if I can kind of clarify one thing. The individual, when he calls 911, as I mentioned, he does not want to live anymore, and the information that was relayed by the family members tell us that they had left the house at this time and that he was the only one there. So at no time were there any other homes that were in danger, any other lives in the vicinity as a result of our police action. And I'll take any questions that you might have.
Family members say this man had a history of mental illness, and they're wondering why the officers couldn't use their tasers on him.
This is the preliminary investigation or a preliminary media briefing at this time. I'll get more facts and details as they arrive. But you have one officer on scene. The other officer was close behind that initial officer. When it comes to that, you have an individual with a knife who's advancing on the officer, has a 1,000-yard stare, is disobeying all types of lawful commands to drop the weapon. At that point, the officer made the decision at that time to use deadly force, and that's what he did.
How many officers fired, sir?
Just one, and I'll identify that officer and as far as how many rounds were fired at the next press briefing that we have, which will take place tomorrow.
Do you know at a distance?
I don't. I'll know that at the follow-up.
Any other questions?
Has the sheriff's office been called to this address before for disturbances?
I haven't verified that myself. I've been told that we've been out here several times, and again, I'll have that more information later.
How does it work on your end of it as a responding officer when you know, or at least have information that the person you're dealing with might have some sort of mental, psychological issue?
Well, as you know, for the officers that are out here handling the calls for service, as well as all the members of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, we receive training in the academy on how to deal with people with mental illness, as well as whenever we're on scene with them also. So, I mean, you've got to take that in consideration whenever you respond to these calls, individuals that have mental illness. But again, you have an individual who's armed with a knife, who's definitely a threat to the officer, as well as bystanders in the area.
Can you release the man's name, sir?
I'm not at this time.
Any other questions?
Okay. Can you give your name and title?
My first name's Chris, last name is Butler, and I'm the Chief of Investigations.
About how large physically was the person who was shot, sir?
I don't know that.
What's left for you guys to do out here now? How long will some of these streets and stuff be closed?
I would imagine, depends on the weather. Once the weather clears for us, we're probably out here probably another hour, up to 2 hours, processing the scene, and then we'll return, we'll take down all the tape. And
When do you think you'll be able to release the person's name, sir?
once we make sure that we notify next of kin, I know you mentioned you'd spoken to a family member. I don't know that, so we will release all that information like we do later, which will hopefully be by tomorrow morning when we do our follow-up press conference.
All right, thanks, Chief.
All right.